On the very first page of Tanya, the title page of Tanya, before the introduction, Rabbi Zalman stated that the aim of his book is to show us how to serve God, to become a good, righteous, holy, moral person is close to you. It's not far away, it's close to you. It's something that is totally available to all of you. It's realistic. It's realistic to become someone who really serves and connects to God. But he said that the way he's going to teach it is in the longer, shorter way. Meaning, as we discussed then, that there are shorter, longer ways and there are longer, shorter ways. A shorter, longer way means a way that seems short, seems like a quick fix. You're going to change your life in 1 hour. But in the end, it's much longer because you spend money, you spend time and emotional effort, and you sort of get nowhere. You have to start again. Then there's the longer, shorter ways, which means that it's a much longer, much more difficult, arduous journey. You're going to have to put in much more effort. It's going to take a lot more from you, but it's shorter. You're going to get there in the end. You'll actually get somewhere. And so in that way, it's worth it. So on the one hand, he's telling us that it's totally realistic to become an elevated person, to become a better person than you are today, much better. But it's going to be a longer, shorter path. Today we've reached chapter 6, and it's around now that some students of Tanya start to drop off, because chapter 6 is quite a challenging chapter. The idea that it puts forth is one that really is not all that easy to swallow. It's where the longer, shorter path starts to really come out, that this is a serious project that Rabbi Zalman is suggesting for us. However, it's the longer, shorter path. Meaning if we stick through chapter 6 and the ensuing chapters, we'll see that there's something very, very powerful and very real that Rabbi Zalman is offering us. While what we've seen in the previous chapters, Chapter 1 introduced the idea that we have two souls and started describing the animal soul. Chapter 2 introduced us to the second soul, the divine soul, the divine being within us. Chapter 3, 4, and 5 continue to speak in detail about the divine soul. In chapter 3, we learned that the divine soul has faculties, intellectual faculties and emotional faculties. Chachma, Bina, Das, the conception, comprehension and application, and then the emotional faculties that are in general love and attraction, or awe and rejection. The emotional and the intellectual faculties of the soul. That was chapter 3. Chapter 4 then described the garments of the soul: thought, speech and action, our behavior. There's who you are, and that's your personality, intellect and emotion. There's what you do, the garments of the soul, what you think, say and do. That's your behavior. That was chapter 4. But in that we've been speaking until now about the divine soul's elements of its character. The divine intellect, the divine emotion, holy thoughts, and elevating yourself through action. We described how doing a mitzvah takes you to a place higher than you can reach on your own. That while your emotion, your intellect may be refined or holy to a certain extent, but it's limited because it's human. Whereas a mitzvah, when you do a mitzvah, you do a divine command, you're doing what God has suggested, what God has asked you to do. That is infinite, that takes you beyond. So the garments of the soul take you to a place higher than the soul itself. Then in chapter 5, we saw that even more powerful than that is the study of Torah, because Torah is the divine wisdom that has been limited for the human mind to be able to digest. It is God's thoughts that we can actually be privy to, can listen in on, and can ingest. When you study something, you become it. When you do a mitzvah, you've done something holy. You've put on a garment that is holy. When you study Torah, you have consumed, you've imbibed, you've eaten up divine wisdom. It's become a part of you. Anything you study becomes your mind. And if what you study is Torah, is holy, is divine, so then your mind has become holy and divine. That was chapter 5. So from chapter 2, being introduced to the divine soul, chapter 3, 4, and 5 have told us more details about the divine soul. Now in chapter 6, we're going to go back to the animal soul, the other side to our personality, the not so elevated, holy, and beautiful side to our personality, and get to know it a bit better. And in this chapter, chapter 6, when we study the structure of the animal soul, we're going to answer the question, do you trust your feelings? And should you? In the description of the divine soul, we said that the mind directs the heart. Our feelings are directed by intellect. But in our personal experience, we may find different to that. To say that the mind directs the heart, that your feelings are based on intellect, the way you perceive reality is how you'll feel about reality, doesn't always seem to be the case. It seems to be that quite often in our lives, we have feelings that are not directed by intellect, that are stronger than intellect. We may know something in our mind, but we feel something totally different in our heart. It doesn't seem to come from the mind. We don't seem to always be able to control our feelings through our mind. And so, while earlier in Tanya, Rabbi Zalman set down a rule and said that the mind rules the heart by nature. The very makeup of the human being is that the mind directs the heart. The mind is in control, the heart follows what the mind dictates. That doesn't seem to be played out in our daily lives, that our heart is so directed by our mind. In fact, on the contrary, it seems sometimes the heart is much stronger than the mind's power. To understand why this seems to be the case and what is really going on inside of us, we're going to delve into chapter 6, introducing on a more detailed level our animalistic soul. Now, just recall that this was the first, bombshell of Tanya. We were told that we have two distinct souls. While most of us would have just assumed that you have a soul, but to hear that you have two souls is something that Tanya taught us as a new idea. Not that Rabbi Zalman made up that idea, he quoted earlier Kabbalists, but he made it into a central theme in his book, the soul wrestling between these two souls. You have two distinct souls. One of them, the first one we described, is the animalistic soul, which is our life force, which is our drive to exist, to survive, to look after ourselves. If we're hungry, it's our animalistic soul telling us that our body needs to be fed. If we're tired, it's our animal soul saying that our body needs rest. The fact that if I throw something at you, you duck, is because your animal soul wants to live, and something being thrown at you could be a risk to your life, so you get out of the way. The natural drive to survive, live, be comfortable is our animalistic soul. Just like an animal has all of those instincts of survival, of hunger, needing to rest, and all those things, a human being shares that with the animal kingdom. What we have different to the animal kingdom is the divine soul, that part of us that is not satisfied with simply being fed, simply resting and eating and being comfortable. There's a yearning for something higher. We want meaning, we want purpose, we want to serve a higher goal. That is our divine soul that is selfless, unlike the animal soul which is selfish. These are the two souls that inhabit the one body. Now we're going to learn a bit more in detail what that animal soul is all about, how it is structured. We've understood the structure of the divine soul as being intellect and emotion with three garments of thought, speech, and action. How does the animal soul break itself down? So Rabbi Zalman starts chapter 6 with a quote. It's a quote from the book of Ecclesiastes, biblical book by King Solomon. In Hebrew, Zeh lu'umat zeh asa Elokim, which means God created everything with an equal and opposite counterpart. This is a general principle in spirituality, that there is a mirror image of good and evil, of positive and negative in the world. Whatever energy there is in goodness, there is an equal and opposite energy in evil. Whatever exists in the realm of holiness, there is a counterpart in the world of unholiness. That is its mirror image, its nemesis, its opposing force, its balance. This is, of course, necessary for free choice. We can only have free choice if there are two parts, and those two parts have to be equal. Equal meaning both available to us, both possible, and both options. By there being good and evil in the world, when we choose good and didn't choose evil, that's significant. If the world would only have goodness in it, if there'd only be goodness in the world, the only option would be to do the right thing, the good thing, the moral thing, the upright thing. There'd be no possibility to do bad, to do evil. Then the choice to do good would not be a choice and would not be significant. The fact that you did something nice today, that you did a good deed, would have no significance, because what else could you do? There's nothing else to do. There's no other option. Goodness only has any meaning if there's the possibility of evil. The doing something right has significance because you didn't have to do it. You could have done something else. And so the world is created in such a way that everything has an equal and opposite. What is in goodness, you'll find in evil as well. They are two sides of reality. This principle is true of the universe as a whole, and it is also true of the inner universe of the human being. That all the attributes we have in our divine soul, our good, elevated, higher self, those exact same attributes are found in their equal and opposite version in the animal soul. And so, continues Rabbi Zalman, just as the divine soul consists of 10 holy sfirot, holy emanations of God, and is clothed in 3 holy garments, so does the soul which is derived from the other side, which is clothed in the man's blood, consist of 10 crowns of impurity. So here he's saying, just as we have already learned in chapter 2, that the divine soul consists of 10 attributes, called the 10 sfirot, reflections of God's emanations, of his creative energies, the 3 intellectual faculties and the 7 emotional faculties. Just like we have that in the divine soul, we also have that in the animal soul. It also has those 10 faculties. Just like we said in chapter 3, that in chapter 4, that the divine soul has garments. It enclothes itself to express itself in thought, speech, or action. That's not you, that's what you're doing. That's not your personality, it's how you're expressing yourself. The divine soul expresses itself in thoughts that are holy, in words that are holy, and in actions that are holy. That's the divine soul. Just like the divine soul has those 3 garments, so too the animal soul has those 3 garments as well. It has the 10 crowns of impurity, and it has the unholy garments, which we'll speak about soon. The terminology here, some interesting words are used here. He doesn't actually call the soul here the animal soul. He calls it the soul which is derived from the other side. The other side is an Aramaic Kabbalistic term, sitra achra. Sitra achra literally means the other side, the bad side of things, the dark side of the force. Just like we said zelu mazeh, that there's this side and that side, that there are 2 opposing energies in the world. So there's the good side, which is the right side, which is where we're supposed to be. And then there's what's called the other side. It's called other because it is other. It's not the one we're supposed to go on. We're not the way we're supposed to follow. It's not, even though they're 2 equal and opposite sides, but our attitude to them is not equal and opposite. Our attitude is there's the right side and the wrong side. There's where you're supposed to be, and there's that other place that you're not supposed to be. In fact, from a divine perspective, the existence of evil, the existence of the other option of doing evil, of doing the wrong thing, is no more than the road you're not supposed to take. From God's perspective, God is all good. God doesn't create bad. He creates good, and He creates the thing you're not supposed to do, the path that you're never supposed to go on, the area that is supposed to be avoided, which is also good, because avoiding that makes good good. So from God's perspective, even evil is good because it's a thing you're not supposed to do. The problem is when we do it, then evil becomes a real thing, not just the thing you're not supposed to do, but the thing that we've done already, and that's where evil starts to make problems in the world. So if you can imagine in the Garden of Eden, where God created a perfect world, He created the tree that you're not supposed to eat. As long as you don't eat it, it's good, because you've done what you're supposed to do. But once you eat it, once you do what you're not supposed to do, you've given evil a footing in the world that it didn't deserve on its own. And so the side of evil is called the other side, the thing that you're not supposed to do, the thing that is simply there to contrast, to accentuate goodness. That's all it's there for. It's no more than that. And so our animal soul is from the other side. We have a soul inside of us. It's a part of you. It's not down the street somewhere. It's not across the world. It's inside you, and it's the soul that's from the other side. That is a push, a drive towards doing the wrong thing. It's clothed in your blood, which, as we said earlier, that it's your life force. Your very existence is dependent on this. And we'll see why making this soul being your very existence sounds like a very innocent thing, but it's actually the beginning of the problem. The first problem is that this soul gives you a sense of existence. We'll see that a bit later. And that soul also consists of 10 crowns of impurity. This again is a Kabbalistic term that refers to the 10 spheres, the 10 emanations of energy as they are in their impure form. Just like on the divine side, you have 3 intellectual faculties and 7 emotional faculties. So too on the animalistic side, the other side, you have an intellectual ability that is corrupt and evil, a way to think bad, and you have emotions that tend towards evil. They're called crowns of impurity. The reason they're called crowns is because the word crown in Kabbalistic terminology always refers to something that is doesn't rest within you, but hovers above you. Doesn't become internalized, but stays quite removed. Because evil ultimately has to be created by God, but God is all good, so we can't have a direct connection between God and evil. All we can say is that there is an indirect allowance for evil to exist. God allows it to exist. Just like a crown is not internalized but hovers around, so too the divine energy never really enters into evil. It hovers around evil. It allows evil to exist for a purpose, because evil is there to be vanquished, to be avoided. And so the evil attributes of the soul are referred to as crowns, that which the divine energy surrounds as opposed to enters into. So, Zeh L'U'umah Zeh, God has created this opposite that. Each one has the equal and opposite energies. What the divine soul has, the animal soul has. So far, it would seem that animal soul and divine soul are identical, but opposite. Meaning they have the exact same structure, the exact same makeup, just one of them is going this way, one of them is going that way. The divine soul towards goodness, and the animal soul towards unholiness, towards evil. But as we delve a little bit deeper, we'll see that there are nuanced differences between the way Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to describe the breakdown of the animal soul as opposed to how he described the divine soul, and with that we'll understand a bit more its nature. So in defining the 10 crowns of impurity, the 10 attributes of the animal soul, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, what are these 10 attributes? These are the 7 evil emotions, which stem from the 4 evil elements mentioned above, and the intellect begetting them, which is subdivided into 3, namely wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, the source of the emotions. So here, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is assuming we remember from the chapter 1, from the beginning of Tanya, where it said that our animal soul is made up of 4 elements, just like everything in the universe is made up of 4 elements in a physical sense, that everything's made up of air, fire, water, and earth, so too in the spiritual sense, the soul is made up of those energies that correspond to those 4 energies of air, fire, water, and earth. And in chapter 1, he went in detail as to which negative attributes stem from each one of those elements. The emotions, the 7 evil emotions, stem from those 4 evil elements, and the intellect begetting them, giving birth to them, which is subdivided into 3, Chachma Bina Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, or as we translated them in a more meaningful way, conception, comprehension, and application. Now, do you notice yet any discrepancy between the way Rabbi Shneur Zalman is describing the breakup of the animal soul as opposed to how he described in chapter 2 the divine soul? What's the difference?
We have the emotions before the intellect.
Correct. He's listed the emotional faculties before describing the intellectual faculties. He first says what are the 10 faculties, the 7 emotions, and then he says the 3 intellectual faculties. But on the other hand, that's not how he said in chapter 2. In chapter 2 he said we have 10 faculties, the 3 intellectual faculties and the 7 emotional faculties. Here he's reversed it. On the other hand, when he introduces the intellectual faculties here, he says the intellect begetting them. Begetting meaning giving birth to them. So, on the one hand, it's telling us the emotional faculties before introducing us to the intellectual faculties, but then it's saying, but the intellectual faculties give birth to the emotional faculties. So, it's like going through a family tree, looking at the children, then looking at the parents, and saying, but the parents gave birth to the children. It goes the other way around. And he switched it around. While recognizing that the intellect begets emotion, gives birth to emotion, he lists the 7 emotions first. And there's a reason why he's doing that. Because this is the central difference between the emotional faculties, the intellectual faculties of the divine soul and that of the animal soul. That while the divine soul is centered more in intellect and emotion is an expression of intellect, the animal soul works much more through emotion, and intellect is somewhat schlepped along. It's not such a leader in the animal soul. That we described in detail when we went through chapter 3, how the intellectual powers of the mind direct the emotional powers of the heart. For you to be passionate and excited about something, you need to first appreciate in your mind that it is a good thing. What you think in your mind is good, what you perceive as being worthwhile, valuable, that is what your heart will chase after. That is a strict description of the divine soul. When it comes to something good, you're only really going to feel that it's good, be excited about it, if your mind is convinced that it's good. You're first going to have to perceive in your mind, be convinced in your mind that this is a good thing before you can be excited about it. That's talking about goodness, morality, holiness. But when it comes to things that are not necessarily holy, and certainly when it comes to that which is unholy and immoral, you can desire it with your heart before your mind has perceived that this is actually a good thing. And in fact, the other way around. Your desire for the thing causes you to justify it with your mind that it is good. The fact that we have a word in the English language, justify, to mean utilizing your intellect to explain what you've already decided is right. That's what it means to justify something. And that's because it is such a common feature of being human. It is the animalistic side of ourself, where we already have a preconceived desire of what we want, and we then utilize the intellect to explain why that's the right thing. That is how Rabbi Shneur Zalman is introducing the setup of the animal soul. First having an emotional connection, and then backing it up with intellect. That intellect comes sort of dragged along. So unlike the structure of the divine soul, where intellect leads to emotion, which then leads to behavior, that you first start by analyzing what is right, what is correct, what is the path I should go on. And then you can become emotional, get excited about it, become attached to it. Because intellect, the nature of intellect is that intellect is objective. Intellect in its purest form is simply looking for truth. It's not looking for comfort, it's not looking for convenience, it's looking for truth, reality, what is right. And so our mind is our first portal towards morality. If we really want to discover truth, goodness, then it has to go through the mind. Because your heart, by definition, your emotion is looking at what is good for me, what feels right to me. You can't have emotion without you in it, but intellect you can. Our mind is able to perceive a reality that contradicts ourselves, that is inconvenient to ourselves, that puts us out. Our mind can appreciate that. The heart cannot. It has to feel right about it. Of course, a heart can be very giving and kind and loving, but you have to feel giving and loving and kind at that moment. If you don't feel that, if the heart doesn't feel that, so then the heart is not open. The mind can decide that it's right to do something, even when the heart is not in the mood. The heart is not able to do that. Our emotion is not able to see beyond what we're feeling at the time. We know this from any time when we're in a highly emotional state, where we feel an emotion to the extreme. Any explanation, any rationalization falls on deaf ears. You can't tell me anything other than what I see in front of me. So, for example, if you know somebody who is in an emotional bond, a relationship with somebody that is inappropriate for them, it's not a good relationship. And everybody around them knows that. Everyone can see that this is not a good relationship. That person is not a person that is a good match at all. And it's obvious to everybody else except the person themselves who says, what are you talking about? I'm in love. And this is wonderful. There could be nothing better. And every argument that you can present of why this is no good, it's not good for you, you could do much better than this, you're not yourself anymore. All of those arguments fall on totally deaf ears because you're not talking to a mind, you're talking to a heart. You're talking to somebody who is emotionally caught up in something. And at those moments, there is no argument whatsoever. The most obvious reality is completely invisible to them in that state because they're in an emotional bond. When somebody has a moment of clarity, what does that mean? It means when they are able to step away from their emotional involvement and see reality for what it is. See it for what it is, the facts for what they are. Not my place in it, not what feels good or comfortable or right to me, but what is really right, what is really true. That is a moment of clarity. And only when we have one of those, then we can go back to our emotions and say, I've got to do the difficult work of maybe moving away from this relationship, because even though it feels good, it is not good. The mind can say it is not good. The heart says what it feels. It can't say what the true reality is. So we all know people who are more heart people, more emotion people, and other people who are more intellect people. Somebody who is more of a heart-based person will generally be difficult to convince out of anything that they feel. Somebody who's more intellectual, you can debate with them and convince them of something. On the other hand, somebody who's extremely intellectual is very removed, because the nature of intellect is to be objective, to observe, to not get involved in anything. And so a purely intellectual person would be extremely cold, disconnected, aloof, because intellect is an observer, looks around at reality, doesn't get attached or involved in anything. The truth is, none of us are totally purely intellectual or completely emotional. In any topic and in any subject, we have some emotional bias, and we have some ability to be objective and removed. And there are certain times when we're more or less. But when it comes to our divine soul, the divine soul, to connect to the divine reality, it has to start with intellect. Because you are a person, you're a being, and you're a being in this physical world. To connect to the truth of God, to ultimate truth, you can't do that just based on feeling. There has to be an intellectual exploration, a search for truth. And that search has to be in a way that you're willing to do what's inconvenient, what doesn't sit right with you, what you didn't think all your life, a willingness to see truth for what it is. When you have that intellectual realization that this is good, once that seeps into your mind, once it really is good, once it really is the right thing, then your emotion will follow. You will see that in your emotion as well, and you'll be able to follow it. So in the example of somebody who is emotionally involved, let's say, in a wrong relationship, it's bad for them. So in that moment, they can't see past it. But if they have a moment of clarity where their mind sees reality, sees what it really is, in time, their heart will follow their new reality. That will take time, but when it becomes real in your mind, it can then follow in the heart. That's how the divine soul works. To do the right thing, it starts in your mind and goes down to emotion. However, the animal soul works differently. In the animal soul, emotion leads the intellect, meaning what we desire comes first, and then we justify it with arguments of why it's the right thing. We want this thing for ourselves. We're not desiring something for its ultimate truth. We're desiring it for our selfish needs. When you have a selfish desire, so then it starts with desire, and then it's backed up with arguments, all types of amazing arguments why this is the right thing to do. But those arguments don't really stand up to scrutiny because they're not based on objective truth. You've decided already what you want, and now you're trying to back it up with your arguments. On the other hand, in the animal soul, even though emotion leads intellect, even though we've already decided what we want and then we back it up, intellect does have a place in shaping emotion. And we'll see that in a minute. Intellect, even in the animal soul, is still a director of emotion, but it's not really leading. It's not really in the lead. Emotion is in the lead. we can find ourselves in situations where this can be very familiar. From the most mundane, everyday type of moral challenge to the big challenges in life. So, just for example, somebody who keeps kosher. We had this in our home this evening, where just before dinner, some of our kids snuck a piece of chocolate, and the chocolate was milk chocolate, and dinner was meat. And you're supposed to wait between milk and meat a certain amount of time. Now, when you are hungry, you want to eat something, and you know that you've eaten, let's say, meat, and you want to have something that's milk. Now, you have to wait. Many people wait 6 hours, some people wait 3 hours, but you have to wait the correct amount of time. Now, let's say you ate meat some hours ago. You now really want to have a piece of chocolate or a cup of coffee with milk in it. And you're not exactly sure what time it was that you finished eating the meat. So you look at your watch and you say, I think it was 6 hours ago. Not exactly sure, but I think it was pretty close to 6 hours ago. At that stage, you are not ready to really judge whether it was 6 hours ago or not, because you want a piece of chocolate. And wanting a piece of chocolate it may come as a surprise to some people, is not a divine act. It doesn't come from the divine soul. It's not sinful, it's not horrible, but it's coming from your desire to feed self, to enjoy something of yourself. Your desire to eat that chocolate will so blind your judgment that you will develop an entire explanation of how it must have been 6 hours ago that you ate that meal, because it's not possible any other way. And you'll convince yourself that this is the truth, so you could eat that chocolate. That's a small, everyday type of thought. But the same thing can apply to bigger challenges as well. When a partnership is offered to you, a business partnership that could be extremely lucrative, a very good way to make a lot of money in a short amount of time, it's an amazing opportunity. But in looking at it, there are some moral scruples with the way the business is done. There could be some questions as to whether this is exactly a kosher business. So here again, our desire to simply make money and make money quickly will cloud our judgment. And as we analyze the deal, we say, well, it's not actually stealing anything from anybody. It's not total dishonesty. They could do their due diligence and they can find out what it's about, and it's all transparent somewhere, and I never said it's this, and it's not an absolute lie, and there are all types of justifications that can come to why it's totally fine to do this thing. That is the mind following the heart. That is that we have a desire to make this work, and so our mind is coming up with the backing of why it's fine, why it's okay. And sometimes our mind can work in the most brilliant ways when it's being pushed by our desire to do something. We come up with the most ingenious excuses and explanations of why it's okay what we're doing, because we're so invested in this, we're so connected to it already, that this creativity comes out of us, that we were able to invent the most brilliant explanations and justifications for stuff that is completely wrong. If you would ask somebody else who is not going to make any money on this, and you just ask them, so what do you think? Do you think I should go into this business? Is this an honest kosher business or not? They would say in an instant, that's totally twisted, like it's dishonest. How could you do such a thing? Because they're not vested in it. If they're from a distance, they can look at it totally intellectually, totally in as a theory, and they can see it for what it is. Whereas you in it can't see that at all. The same with the person who says, so can I eat this chocolate now? Have I waited long enough? So on the outside, someone will say, well, why don't you wait another 20 minutes? Then for sure you'll be able to eat it. Oh, didn't think of that. That's a brilliant answer. I can wait 20 minutes. When you have the desire is so urgent, it's so now, you've in your mind built all the excuses and explanations that you just want to make it happen. This is the animal soul's modus operandi. It is taking a desire, the emotional connection, what you want, and then the mind comes to explain why it's good, why it's okay, why it's fine. The heart leads the mind in the animal soul. But if you look carefully, Rabbi Shneur Zalman here said the 7 emotions, he spoke first about the emotions, and then spoke about the intellect. But he said the intellect does give birth to the emotions, just like we described when we in the divine soul's structure, that the intellect are the parents and the emotions are the children, that the parent gives birth to the children, that what you perceive in reality gives birth to how you feel. Here as well, he does describe the intellect as begetting, giving birth to the emotions. And yet, he's saying that the emotions come first before the intellect. What does he actually mean by that? So, this will be explained by the next paragraph in this chapter. Rabbi Shneur Zalman introduces an interesting idea. He says, for the emotions are according to the quality of the intellect. Here we're talking about the animal soul. The emotions are according to the quality of the intellect. Hence, a child desires and loves petty things of little value, for his intellect is too immature and undeveloped to appreciate things that are much more precious. Likewise, is he provoked to anger and gets upset over trivial things. What is Rabbi Shneur Zalman here saying? He seems to be trying to explain here how even in the animal soul, the emotions are shaped by intellect. The quality of the intellect will determine the type of emotions you have. It's not that the emotions have nothing to do with intellect. There is a certain direction that intellect gives to emotion even in the animal soul. The example he gives is the difference of a child's emotions as opposed to an adult's emotions. A child's desire gets excited, things that are petty or of little value. If you offer a 2-year-old child a $50 bill or a lolly, so depends which family, but most kids will go for the lolly. A 2-year-old kid will go for the lolly because a lolly, they know what it is. They know its sweetness. The $50 bill, they don't appreciate what it is. They don't know that with a $50 bill you can buy a lot of lollies. Their intellect has not developed to differentiate, to understand the value of money, but the value of a lolly, that far they've got. That they know. And so they will run for the lolly and not for the $50 bill. That is because their awareness, their understanding of the world is not yet developed. And so therefore their desire is based on their understanding of the world. It's not that they don't want what the $50 bill can buy. It's they don't understand what the $50 bill can buy. It's not that their heart doesn't desire it. It's just that their mind doesn't appreciate it. And so only when they get older, they'll appreciate that this is worth more than that, and they'll start to desire more elevated things, meaning things of more value. So too with what they get upset at and angry at. That a child is able to get furious and angry at the smallest thing, and sometimes something that is not really bad at all. So if you hold a child back from running onto the street, they get upset at you for holding them back because they want to run. But a child doesn't understand that you can't run on the street. It's dangerous. You're doing something for them. When you tell a child it's time to go to bed, so no child wants to go to bed. There's a certain point in life where that switches, and you only want to sleep, and you wish you could sleep at any time, at any moment. But at an earlier stage of your life, sleep is the enemy. You don't want to ever go to bed. So the fact that sleep is necessary, it's for your good, that a child doesn't appreciate yet. And so they think they're being punished by having to go to bed, whereas you're doing it for their good. A child doesn't appreciate, doesn't understand, has not yet developed the intellect to see the breadth of what is going on. And so therefore they get upset at things that are of little value and little consequence and trivial and no need to get upset at. And they get excited about things that are not such a big deal in the first place. As your intellect develops, your emotions develop, meaning the more you have an appreciation of reality, the higher your desires become, you desire things of more value. And so a child could spend hours playing with a little car and be excited by a little sports car, and this is something that is the best thing in the world, to play with a sports car, whereas an adult would never be so excited about such a thing. Or children get very upset. If they dropped their ice cream, that would be the biggest tragedy in the world, that the ice cream fell on the floor. I mean, what's an ice cream? How much does it cost? How hard is it to get another one? It's not such a big deal. But explain that to a little kid who dropped their ice cream on the floor. It's the end of the world. Whereas an adult would never feel so upset about ice cream. Our emotions develop, and therefore our ability to appreciate reality develops. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman seems to be saying here is that while in the animal soul, emotion leads intellect, what we want comes first, our explanation why we want it and why it's right, our justification comes second. That's true. But what we want in the first place is somewhat determined by our level of intellect, meaning our awareness, our appreciation of reality. It's not that our intellect decides what's good and then our emotions chase after what's good. That's the divine soul. The animal soul is looking what's good for me. But our definition of what's good for me does develop based on our intellectual understanding. And so as we get older, we realize that sleep is important. And $50 is worth more than a lolly. And if your ice cream falls, you can get another one. There's more perspective that is developed. But that doesn't mean that we're able to see beyond self. Our animal soul is still looking what's good for me. Just we have a deeper appreciation as we get older of what good for me means. And so therefore we can see beyond the superficiality of a lolly, and we can see we can get more lollies out of $50. But we're still essentially selfish. The animal soul is still essentially selfish. It's still deciding this is good and then justifying why it's good for me. So while in the divine soul, it's quite a neat structure that first the mind perceives that which is beyond me, a reality that is beyond myself, a goodness, a truth, a morality that is beyond my limited scope. The mind perceives it, and from there we develop an excitement to do the right thing, to do something good, to be a moral person. It starts with the mind and then goes to the heart. In the animal soul, it's a bit more complex, that the default position of the animal soul is, what do I like? What do I want? The emotional bond. What's good for me? The mind does have an influence on what I think is good for me, depending on my level of maturity, but it's still essentially selfish, what's good for me. And my justification, why it's good for me, is coming after the fact that I want it. That is where the animal soul is. Any questions so far on this? So, now that we have a picture of the structure of the animal soul, the 10 faculties, intellectual and emotional, where the emotional leads the intellect, now Rabbi Shneur Zalman adds, now these 10 unclean attributes, when a person meditates in them, or speaks them, or acts by them, his thought, which is in his brain, and his speech, which is in his mouth, and the power of action, which is in his hands, together with his other limbs, all these are called the impure garments. Meaning, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is very structured here. He's going very much mirroring how he described the divine soul. Just like in the divine soul, we understood that there's your divine personality, your intellect and emotion, and then there's your divine garments. When you do something good, you do a mitzvah, you think, speak, or act in a way that is in line with the divine will. So too in the animal soul, there's your personality, the intellect and emotion of your animal soul, the things that you want to make yourself feel good, and then the things that your mind justifies are good. That's your inner self. But then there's doing it, actually doing something that you want or your mind wants that is purely to feed self. And they are the unclean, the impure garments of the soul. Meaning, when you actually actively think about fulfilling your own desires, or you speak about it, plan to do it, and you actually do it, so then you're putting on a garment of the animal soul. These are the garments of the animal soul. So the structure of the animal soul is, again, that there's the personality of the animal soul, the way your animal soul desires, what it wants and how it thinks, its attitude, its justification of what it wants. And then there's acting on it, acting on based on the animal soul, where you do something. And remember, behavior doesn't just mean doing, it means saying or even thinking, actively thinking about something animalistic, selfish, and instinctive. So just like the divine soul has its personality and its garments, the animal soul has its personality and its garments. The personality, what it is, the garments, what it does. Now, based on what we've studied until now, what would we assume are the impure garments of the animal soul? What are the garments of the animal soul? Meaning, we know what the garments of the divine soul are. When we studied in chapter 3 about the divine soul structure, and then chapter 4 about its garments, the divine soul has a perception of what's right, a desire to do what's good. That's its personality. And the garments of the divine soul are thinking, saying, or doing that which is God's will. Doing a mitzvah, doing an act of kindness, an act of holiness, thinking positive thoughts, studying wisdom of God, speaking words of kindness. All these things are the garments of the divine soul. And when we put them on, we're putting on a divine garment. We're elevating ourselves to a place higher than we could go on our own. That's the divine soul. So then what are the garments of the animal soul? It's an expression of the animal soul's desires. So what would be the equal and opposite of the mitzvahs, the commandments of God? Bad thoughts, bad actions. So it would seem, what we would expect Rabbi Zalman to now list are the garments of the animal soul being evil thoughts, evil words, and evil acts. That when you do something wrong, when you hurt somebody, when you act immorally, when you say something wrong, you speak slander about somebody or lie, when you think evil thoughts, that is the garments of the animal soul. Why not?
I think it's more just self-satisfaction, selfishness. I don't think it's necessarily seen. I don't think it's as clear as that. I think it's more just satisfying the natural self.
Mm-hmm. So just self-satisfaction. That is the garments of the animal soul. What Rabbi Zalman here describes as impure garments. So selfishness includes what? What's an example of a selfish act?
Thoughtless stealing.
Thoughtless. Stealing is immoral.
No.
It's not just selfish.
I want the car. He gets a nicer car. I want the car. Or like chocolate you had before.
Eating chocolate. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with the meeting.
After 6 hours or before 6 hours?
Before.
Before 6 hours. Okay.
Not sharing a chocolate.
Not sharing a chocolate. Okay. So how about eating chocolate after you've waited 6 hours?
Well, that's.
Is that impure garment? Evil?
Oh, depends on.
What about seeing somebody else's car and buying it? Not stealing it, buying it. I like that car and I buy it.
It's good.
Is that impure? Evil?
No.
No.
As long as you don't like
Nothing wrong with that.
It's self, it's indulging.
It's animalistic, it's indulging. Is it evil?
No. Not
Could be
necessarily.
seen as evil, as opposed to the divine soul, then it is considered an evil.
So, what about eating breakfast? Lunch,
You can
dinner.
eat whatever you want, in consideration. There's no, just whatever you want, without thinking of that.
Eating, not overeating, just eating.
It's a must. You've got to survive.
You have to survive. Right.
Isn't that a
Right.
divine act? I mean, I know it feeds the animal soul, but we need to nourish ourselves.
Correct. We need to nourish ourselves, so that should be a divine act. So it would seem that an evil act is definitely an unclean, impure garment. So if somebody steals, if somebody eats the chocolate before their time, If somebody does something immoral, that's clearly a garment of the animal soul. If somebody does a mitzvah, a good act, a selfless act, a moral act, that's definitely the garment of the divine soul. So what about something that is neither? That is not moral or immoral. It's not holy, it's not unholy. It's not good or bad. It just is. But it is feeding myself. So it's not a selfless act. I'm eating lunch. Or I buy a car that I like. Or I eat a piece of chocolate that I'm allowed to eat. These are not immoral acts. They're not moral acts. So whose garments are they? Who is being expressed in that act?
Animal soul is something that I want, that I want, but it's all right for me to have.
Right. It's an animal soul because it's expressing what I want.
But
It's not expressing what is good, it's expressing what is good for me. And so this is where I believe, this is where Tanya gets serious. Because Rabbi Shneur Zalman says the following: here are the garments of the animal soul. All utterances and thoughts which are not directed towards God and His will and service. That is the garments of the animal soul. For this is the real meaning of Sitra Achra, we mentioned earlier, the other side. Meaning, not the side of holiness. If it's not the side of holiness, it's the other side. If it's not God's will, it's the other side.
Even if we say bracha and
Oh, one second. For the Holy One, blessed be He, dwells only on such a thing that nullifies itself completely to Him. Meaning, this is the crux of the entire thinking of Rabbi Shneur Zalman throughout Tanya and all of his writings. This is the thread that permeates all of it, and this is what, once you get this and once you accept this, that's when you're a student of Rabbi Shneur Zalman. That there is God, and anything that's not God is bad news. God is not just an element, a character, a player in the universe. There's godliness, and anything that's not godliness is unholiness, is its opposite. There is nothing in between. There's no middle ground. There is God, and anything else is opposing it. Like one person said, you're either with us or you're against us. There's nothing in between. Meaning, every act that we do, every piece of behavior, every move we make, it is either going to be expressing our divine soul because it is a part of the divine will, or the other side. It is strengthening the power of impurity, of evil. And there's nothing in between. Now, this we need to get our head around, because that sounds like an extreme standpoint. To say that either you're in or you're out in every single move, either it's God or it's the opposition, is a very strong statement to make. Does that mean that my eating breakfast is immoral, is evil? Does that mean that me buying a car, eating a piece of chocolate, all these examples, most of what I do, most of the day, most of the time, is all counter to God, is all evil? On a cursory reading, that's what he seems to be saying. Either you're doing a mitzvah or you're getting in the way. You're increasing bad in the world. And so, if we would leave it there, if we would stop Tanya Chapter 6, so then we would think that we have to somehow become some holy angelic being that is constantly doing mitzvahs every moment of the day, because if you stop for a moment, then you're increasing evil in the world, you're causing problems. Stop for a moment, meaning stop to just go for a walk, to relax a bit, to have a cup of coffee. Well, that's not a mitzvah. Where did God command you to have a cup of coffee and go for a walk? Why are you stopping to do your holy work? It would seem that either you're increasing holiness or you're decreasing it, you're opposing it. But what we'll see is that's not quite the case. Even though Rabbi Shneur Zalman means what he says here, that there's God and there's everything else, and you're either with it or against it, but it's not so simple as to what is with God and what is against God. Every single act we do, as long as it's not immoral, it can be at least an accessory to holiness. Every single move we do can increase goodness in the world, even if it itself is not a mitzvah.
If we are mindful of what we're doing?
Yes. That there are in the end going to be three realms. There's the realm of holiness and goodness, which is when you do a mitzvah, you do a holy act. There's the realm of unholiness and evil, where you do a sin, an unholy act. There is a middle area that is not a middle ground. It could go either way. Meaning, much of our life is spent on doing things that are not a mitzvah and they're not sinful, like eating breakfast. Eating breakfast is not a commandment. It's also not doing anything wrong. You got to eat breakfast. You got to eat. You got to survive. But that act is either going to be a holy act or an unholy act, depending on the details of how we do it. What our intent is when we're doing it, the mindfulness, the way we are going about it, our attitude to it, and the mode, the mood, the sense, the thoughtfulness that we have while we're doing that act. It will either be refining us or dragging us down. And in that way, there's nothing in between. So in other words, a mitzvah, when you do a mitzvah, even if you weren't so mindful about doing the mitzvah, but you've done something good. When you do something immoral and evil, again, even if you weren't so mindful of it, but if you've done it, you've done it. You've done an act that is immoral. But there's a whole lot in the middle where it all depends on the way you've done it. If you've done it in the right way, you haven't broken any rules, that's not good enough yet. It has to be, so what's the purpose of it? Which direction is this going? Is this serving your divine soul, or is it serving your animal soul? Is this an accessory to selflessness or to selfishness? And every act we do is one or the other. Now, Rabbi Zalman in the ensuing chapters is going to go into great detail about the various possibilities here, because what does this actually practically mean? How should I be eating breakfast now? What should I be doing? What if I ate breakfast this morning and I forgot about this? I just ate breakfast. Sometimes it just happens. I just eat breakfast. I wasn't thinking of anything particularly holy. I wasn't thinking of anything unholy. I was just eating. What happens then? Is that in between? Is that helping this way or that way? Can I fix it? Is it too late? What if I've eaten breakfast a lot of times like that? So have I done anything wrong? Is there something that I can do to reverse that? Rabbi Zalman is going to go through all the various options of how we act and how it can be redeemed of how we act. But this is the defining feature of Rabbi Zalman's thought. And this is what makes it a longer, shorter way. This is a big demand. He's saying that there's nothing in between. You're either with or against. There's no middle ground. So in conclusion,
If you eat an apple and you say the bracha before, does this change?
so that we'll see. In the next couple of chapters we'll see. Is it enough to say the bracha? You said a blessing over the apple. Is that enough? Maybe. Maybe you need more than that. Maybe the blessing isn't enough. We will see that in the next couple of chapters. In conclusion, what is this chapter telling us? First of all, our animal soul is a mirror image of the divine soul, because the rule is that holiness and unholiness are two equal opposite energies. There's always going to be a counterpart. And so our animal soul is a mirror image of the divine soul. It has the same elements, but it uses them differently. It's got the intellect and it's got the emotion. It's got the garments, just like the divine soul has. The difference is, in the divine soul, the mind directs the heart. We first perceive truth and then we can get excited about it. Whereas in the animal soul, the heart leads, the mind follows. We first desire something selfishly, and then the mind justifies why it's fine to do that. Anything that is not holy is the other side. The world is divided into two teams. There is holiness and everything else. You're either with God or against Him. So, do we need to become extremists? Does this mean that we have to eradicate any unholy thought, word, or deed from our entire repertoire? That we have to be walking around with a God consciousness on our mind at every second, because any thought that's not about God is the other side? Does every conversation we have to be a religious conversation? You can't talk about anything else, because anything that's not about God is unholy and opposition to Him. Every move we make, every action, every activity that we involve in ourselves, does there have to be a mitzvah 24 hours? Because anything we do that's not that is unholy. Where does sleep come into all this? Where does leisure, rest, recreation have any part? Idle chatter, conversations, can we do any of this? Or do we have to become so focused that every move is holy? As we'll see in the next few chapters, it is an extreme philosophy because it encompasses every move, but it's close to you. It's much more realistic than it sounds. As Rabbi said on his title page, it's a long, short path, but it's close to you. It's totally possible, it's totally realistic, and it can totally change the way you live your life. So the exercise for the week. Observe yourself when making a moral decision. In other words, look at yourself making these moral decisions. When you decide what's right and wrong, or should I do this, should I not do this, is your thinking driven by an objective perception of truth or an internal predisposition toward what you like already? In other words, are your decisions quite predictable, that somehow always the thing you happen to want happens to be the right thing to do? The amazing coincidence that everything that is convenient to you is also the right thing to do? Or are you able to sometimes make the difficult decisions of saying, I'm going to say no to this, I'm not going to do this, I want to, I'm attracted to it, but I know it's wrong and I'm able to hold myself back? Observe how your judgments, how they're made, whether it's for what's true or what's good for me. What is ultimate good or what's good for me? One of the ways that you can test that is to test how quickly you make those judgments. The nature of the animal soul is that it wants quick decisions. Make the decision quickly, because if you make it quickly, you're less likely to analyze it too much. Once you get too analytical, then you're from the removed perspective, you might see it for what it really is. So the animal soul wants us to make quick moral decisions, right or wrong. Yeah, it's fine. Whereas the divine soul says, maybe let's slow down that process and analyze it. Will it matter if we do this in half an hour? If we delay this decision? So watch yourself making snap decisions, moral decisions, if something's right and wrong, and see, is that my animal soul schlepping my intellect to justify what I want already? Or are you able to slow down that process where the divine soul says, I may want this, I have a desire for this in my heart, but it's not good, it's not the right thing, and therefore I'm going to deny myself that. See how on a daily basis the interaction between the animal soul and the divine soul plays out. Okay, we'll stop there. If there are any questions, we can take them, and God willing, we'll continue. So next week and the week after, we're going to go into chapter 7 and then chapter 8, and then we'll probably break for Rosh Hashanah and continue with the next section. But chapter 8 will be the end of the first section of Tanya. It will be quite an achievement to get there, where we will have got a full familiarity with the two players in the soul wrestling, the animal and the divine soul. That will be the next two weeks, please God.